All right. Happy Valentine's Day, Steve.
Hey, thank you, David. That's kind of you. Happy Valentine's Day to you.
Did you see my little pre-marketing tweet? I said this one's going to be just the two of us in celebration of Valentine's Day.
No, but well done.
So Max, for anybody who's used to seeing Max's smiling, happy face, um, he's out, I think, in the jungle or something. He's traveling, celebrating Valentine's Day in real style, I guess. And we're just sort of like normies doing our regular thing. So,
Yeah, we lost our energy guy, so we're going to have to bring the energy.
right,
I think we're
especially
going to
if
bring the
you've
energy. We have so many topics to go through today, so I don't know if having two people versus three is going to help with that or hurt with that, but
Yeah,
we're going
I
to.
feel like it's going to be rapid fire just because there's so many things in the chat and in the spreadsheet. But we'll just get to it. We'll get to it as we did, and it looks like we've got everything rolling now. So I guess first thing that is because it's just news of the day and top of mind. I saw this $436 billion Bitcoin purchased by Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund, UAE sovereign wealth, and I think when I
I think
shared
that's
that in group chat.
million with an M,
Oh,
right?
sorry, million. Yes, yes, of course. Okay, let's not get ahead of
If it were
ourselves.
if it were if it were a billion, we'd dedicate the entire episode to talking about
Right, sorry. Millions, billions, I feel it's a very Dr. Evil moment right there, you know.
that.
Um, but I saw it and I was like, okay, like everybody's making a huge deal out of this. What is the deal? So I did a little bit of research and I guess this is oh, actually, first quiz question for you. Is Abu Dhabi's Mubadala fund the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world or not?
Um, no.
No. Okay, correct. So what is?
Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Or
Uh,
like
that
Iran.
that's the kind of stuff. I thought it was something like that too. I was like, maybe it's one of these or one of the others. It's not at all. It's actually somebody who already has Bitcoin exposure. Does that help? No. They don't have real Bitcoin exposure. You could argue they just have IOUs. But I mean, I think sovereign wealth funds are into IOUs. Norway has a $1.7 trillion sovereign wealth
Mm.
fund. It's the largest in the world, larger than China, which was shocking to me. It was just set up, I think it was officially funded in like 1990 for the first time. It's the largest in the world due to all the oil. Um, but they have a bunch of exposure. They have like maybe three-quarters a point worth of MicroStrategy, and I think they own Coinbase and a bunch of other stuff that are sort of Bitcoin proxies or kind of exposure to Bitcoin, but not like an ETF, which is more close to native Bitcoin. And the UAE thing was a purchase of $436 million worth of BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. So that's kind of like I think big news because it's I think before that we'd seen like El Salvador, which is interesting but not huge from a kind of global impact perspective, and I think also Abu Dhabi's looked at as like a fairly conservative process for investment decisions and sovereign wealth funds and a lot of other sovereign wealth funds take direction from them because they have a pretty good and rigorous process around this. So I think it's actually um, a bit of a moment where the sovereign wealth fund race is on. This may be like the starting gun this morning. It was just revealed in a 10K filing with the SEC. It happened a while back, maybe last quarter, in Q1. But anyway, that's kind of news of the day. But it
Yep.
transitioned. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or I don't track this stuff closely. I kind of thought sovereign wealth funds already held Bitcoin, so this
That's what I thought. I
news,
was like, okay, what's another
this
one?
seems like incremental news to me. But what I think is interesting, so there, I mean, there's clearly an emerging trend of nation states, sovereign wealth funds, corporations, any type of entity. Like I know of many open source projects that have foundations or entities. All of these situations, they're holding Bitcoin, and as we've talked about a lot in this show, how do you hold Bitcoin? Right? It's not an easy answer to that question. There's trade offs. There's many solutions or trade offs. Um, and, I think we saw a tweet from Jameson Lopp poking at this because the way that Abu Dhabi's sovereign fund apparently got exposure to Bitcoin is through BlackRock ETF. So again, that's not necessarily a bad or dumb decision. There's just trade-offs, though. But the irony of this is like another nation, a sovereign nation, sovereign fund is depending on another nation and being friendly to it, not becoming hostile. It's the legal jurisdiction of another nation. Not exactly what a lot of people believe a primary point of Bitcoin is.
And this is actually interesting in a broader context. That Lopp's tweet made me go research. It inspired my research on like, what has happened with gold sovereignty over the years. And there's tons and tons of examples of repatriation of gold when it looked like there was going to be like some either an economic or political or military unrest or kind of volatility that, like Germany or France or various nation states will repatriate gold. They'll say, we want to actually hold it. We're not going to keep it in the vaults of the US or of London. We want to hold it ourselves so that we're truly sovereign. So this is not just like a Bitcoin nerd thing. This is actually like got plenty of precedent.
Yeah, totally agree. It's a real thing. It's always been a real thing, and we can study thousands of years of history of gold. Um, and so the nice thing about Bitcoin is that it's a heck of a lot easier to transport it from the, you know a country that you might start thinking is adversarial to your own country versus trying to like haul extremely heavy gold in airplanes or ships or something
Yep.
across oceans. That said, you also
The
don't
transport
know.
is easy, but the
The
custody is
transport
still
is
kind of,
easy, but the custody is still an issue. Yeah,
yeah.
because you might think that you have friendly relations with one country or that the law is going to work in your favor until the day it doesn't, and that can happen very rapidly. Um, so in any case, I think it's really important that whether you're a nation state, sovereign fund, a corporation, or even a relatively small open source project, whatever the entity is, that you can self custody. And there's a couple components to that. We spent time in the show talking about self custody, like hardware and software solutions for how to manage keys. That's definitely one component. There's another component, though. We haven't really talked about multi-person wallets or more complex situations. I think we've largely just focused on like individual use case. Um,
When you say
but
multi-person, so I know of the case of multi-sig for a single person. Is multi-person just multi-sig for multiple people?
it's independent of multi-sig. So you could have single. You could have a number of different. Separate the wallet and the architecture from the process. But
Okay.
when I say multi-person, one form of that is simply inheritance. Like you want to when you die, you want to make sure that a certain person or set of people get access. But in terms of really what I'm talking about is just like, let's say we had a partnership and we have an entity where we both have a stake in that entity, and we have a treasury with Bitcoin. um, we'd want to set it up so that we probably would want to set it up so that just not one of us has the keys to the coins, just for fiduciary reasons and security reasons as well. So if you have, so that just raises questions. You might want to have three people involved or five people, and multi-sig is a natural solution. Each person has a key. Three of the five people need to sign, so that, that's a pretty straightforward solution. There's even more complex layers too, though, where kind of like the Anchor Watch solution we talked about a few weeks ago, where you can have composability. Like a nation might want to have like different departments have a stake, and like within each department or committee or group of people, they have like K event. So they might have like a 2 or 3 or 3 or 5 or like, you know, 13 of 17 or whatever. And that produces one key. And then there's several of those and they all have to be composed to spend money. there's just trade-offs there because like the more complex you make that, A, it's complexity, and B, it create friction, slow things down. Depending on your use case, you either want friction and slow things down, or you don't. So in the case of like owning hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars of Bitcoin and some kind of like long-term trust or treasury, you probably want to slow things down and have friction. But another big question in all these situations is transfer of control. So in a democracy, if if there's a new administration that you want a peaceful transition of power in the future, if Bitcoin is a substantial portion of a nation's wealth, which we're already seeing examples of this. In Bhutan, it is a substantial portion of their wealth measured in percentage of their treasury as a percentage of GDP. El
What
Salvador,
is that? Is that like single digit or double digit percent?
I don't know the exact numbers, but I did see estimates. I mean, I think it's definitely double digit percentage. It's like very, very material. And El Salvador, I don't think it's as material, but I mean, it's real. So when you have, so we already have real world examples of this. So when you have a transition of power, how do you prevent like the outgoing administration from just rugging and stealing the coins, or
Hmm.
even during so not only you want to safe keep the Bitcoin while there's a set of people in charge, but then when those people rotate out, and this doesn't have to just be a nation. Let's just say we were on a nonprofit board. We had an organization nonprofit board, and let's say there are like three people who hold a key and a two of three, and and board members rotate out. What's the process for transferring keys? Do you have to sweep the whole wallet, or what have you? So I'm not aware of any like published guidelines around this.
Hmm.
Um, so I've suggested this for the Bitcoin design community to as an idea for a project. So if someone like listening to this or hears of this and thinks of someone who would want to tackle this project, I think it would be a really great resource that could impact thousands of organizations even today and in the future. Like many thousands of organizations could benefit from this, because otherwise I worry of two outcomes. One, organizations choose custodial because of the lack of this resource,
Hmm.
and I actually know of real examples of that, where they choose a custodian and they're like an international organization, but they're now dependent on U.S. regulatory environment,
Right.
U.S. administration, etc. And then the second outcome, suboptimal outcome, is that they choose non-custodial, they self-custody, but they don't have guidelines. They have to roll their own policies. And if thousands of so something that's pretty complicated, not straightforward, if you have 1,000 organizations all rolling their own, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Probably only a few of them will get it right. Many will be at
Hmm.
great risk. And then there's some black swan event where there's like a transfer of power, and all of a sudden like the folks leaving power like steal all the money, and then it's a big fiasco.
So do you think these kinds of guidelines would mostly be sort of like human and workflow and process things, or do you expect that there's new technologies or kind of new features that would need to be added to Bitcoin or some other layer to help kind of support some of the processes that might get identified?
Good question. I mean, I think the natural answer is just, yeah, it's more around human processes, workflow. Um, but I think, I'd say part of the project should be like, how can we, where are there areas to automate? Where are there areas to use cryptography, use software, use like enforceable things that aren't dependent on humans and human frailty? So I think that we should inject that as a requirement, but the outcome still might not be perfect, or perfect in the sense that like it's still probably based on human process. But yeah, I mean, again, the lack of having these guidelines, I think, is a miss right now in the space.
So to summarize the kind of ask, is it basically somebody should come up with a set of designs or ideas or proposals for how organizations of various sizes and scopes and responsibilities would do their kind of custody and transition planning?
Yep. and that includes something that we haven't talked about yet, which is also physical security of the people. So another thing on people's minds, like let's say let's say we have a nonprofit, it's the two of us and max, let's say, or the three people who hold keys. There, there's an open question of like, do we publicize our security model or not? If we don't, if we don't tell anyone, and let's say this is like a public good or a public trust or something,
Right.
then it's very opaque, and it would be way easier for the three of us to steal the money and no one knows, because no one else knows our process.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we are super public and transparent about it and have proof of reserves and proof of whatever, then that reduces the risk of us rugging things, but it might create a physical threat to us. So that's another thing that's another consideration as part of this process. Like, how do people grapple with that issue about transparency and dealing with physical security? And I mean, obviously, like if the United States has a Bitcoin strategic reserve that has, an insane amount of money in it, well, maybe choosing the US is a bad example, because I suspect the US would just use like a US based custodian. But if you're
Which for the US may be actually
which might
a reasonable
reasonable,
thing,
because
because you sort of have sovereignty on it. You can sort of put your
yeah.
pinch the neck.
But if you're, let's say you're another country that doesn't want to rely on like a US company, and you do self custody. I mean, imagine if you have like $100 billion in a fund, that whoever holds the keys would be, you definitely need a physical threat assessment and plan as well. So this
Are there
plan
any
would include that as
well-known non-US based custodians, like Bitcoin custodians? Like I think Coinbase is a large one, Fidelity's a large one, US based. Anchorage is much smaller probably, but also one of the notable ones that are active in the ecosystem. Is there
BitGo.
anybody?
Or
BitGo is
that
not based,
No,
or another one in
I'm
the
just
US. Yeah,
adding to your list of
yeah,
a
yeah.
prominent one in the US.
But is there like a well-known one based in Japan or Australia or somewhere else?
Um, I don't know. Like I mean, there's prominent exchanges like Binance and Bitfinex that are not US based, but I'm not aware of them having solutions that are geared towards this. As yes, you can custody funds with them, but it's more for trading.
Hmm.
I don't know if they offer products that one would want for this. So I'm
So
actually not. I'm
they
not
might
aware.
even use BitGo or something to do the custodianship.
Well, certainly Bitfinex did in the past, because they lost hundreds of millions of dollars through that solution. But anyway, yeah. So I think we have a lot of stuff to cover. I think we can move on. But I think this is
So
uh,
last question on that topic.
yeah.
What happens if your nonprofit gets to be so Bitcoin rich that you decide you want to convert it to a for-profit?
Then Elon will try to buy it out from under you.
All right, that's the right answer. Okay, with yeah, we have covered a lot on that topic. Let's bump ahead. Should we do the stablecoins and consensus risk, or
Sure.
that's a different enough topic, right? Still touches on custodianship a little bit. I had watched this video. I think I've shared some videos before from this guy Matthew Kratter, who runs a YouTube channel called Bitcoin University, which actually I enjoy watching his stuff. I feel like he's very grounded and sane and rational. Puts out about a 10 or 15-minute video every morning, kind of weekday. But he had one this past week talking about stable coins and consensus risk, and I thought it was interesting because I had not really thought about it, all the details that he laid out that sort of helped me think about the consensus risk better, and obviously applies to decap stuff and other types of consensus stuff we've talked about. But he was talking about, take the example of, if you sort of think about a stable coin always has an issuer, right? There's always some entity like a Tether or Circle, USDT or USDC, who takes in dollars and then issues the stable coin. And where they issue that, that's sort of like, they're obviously a centralized organization that does that. And so the example from the Matthew Crowder video was, he was saying that stable coins create this weird consensus question, which is if I think when Ethereum had some sort of a chain split, or they sort of went in two different directions, if there was USDT on that chain before the split, that USDT doesn't get multiplied by two, but the chain splits and now it's multiplied by two. So now the person who controls the issuance of that stablecoin, so like Tether or Circle, gets to say, hey, we're going to choose this as the real one, or we're going to choose the other one as the real one, which means that they now have a lot of power to sort of just kind of unilaterally decide that this is the one where we're going to reissue. And that is a huge centralizing force around what people kind of sort of don't really hold themselves to account of decentralization, and kind of it's sort of like turn over a lot of trust to those types of organizations. So stablecoins create that kind of risk, and then there's been a bunch of questions we've been discussing and trying to understand with things like Taproot assets now kind of having stablecoins and USDT, saying that they're going to do a partnership to get stablecoins on Bitcoin. Is having stablecoins on Bitcoin a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Sort of, is it a bunch of question marks? How would you think about sort of the questions there?
Yeah, well, let's first. I'd like to just add to the Ethereum. Right, I'm surprised this is not discussed more. It seems like a really serious situation on Ethereum, and I remember when they switched to proof of stake, there was some discussion around this, but I'm not aware of much. But just to amplify what you just said, like in Ethereum, there's a lot of smart contracts, many of which depend on USDC. And whether it's USDC, USDT, it doesn't really matter. They depend on stable coins. And especially because it is so centralized right now for issuers, you mentioned Circle and Tether, it just grants them tremendous power. Let me go through a specific example of what might happen. So let's say that there was government pressure to add KYC at the protocol layer. Most people, whether you're in Bitcoin or Ethereum, would scoff at that, say, no way. But what if a version of the protocol was created with KYC, and then there was a fork created, and then government pressure applied to Circle, for example, with USDC, that you have to support this fork, or you're going to face massive fines, put you out of business, or you're going to go to prison. There's coercion there. What do you think is going to happen? Circle is going to support the KYC fork, and as users, then you might say, well, users are going to revolt because that's not the vision they had for the protocol. But if a substantial amount of the economic activity on the chain is locked up in smart contracts that depends on this outcome, if a large percentage of Ethereum users had most of their money at stake here, they literally would lose all their money if the dollar stablecoin goes to the fork they don't like. What are they going to choose? Like, what would you choose? I don't know. I mean, it really forces the question about it, your ideology and your money. So
Yep.
I think that is a huge risk because if it's a small portion of the overall economic activity, then I think it's not a risk because ideology would win then. So I guess I haven't studied this enough to really understand, is Bitcoin different, like UTXO model versus account model, or just other factors, or like with the Taproot assets approach and architecture and design being different, does that introduce different variables and reduce the risk? Maybe. I don't know. I haven't studied enough to know. So I don't have strong conviction like, oh my God, Bitcoin's at risk because of this. But it does really seem to me like Ethereum is at risk. I can't articulate an argument of why Bitcoin would not be at risk. I mean, the only way it wouldn't, so one reason it's not at risk is if stablecoins never take off on Bitcoin. Well, that's not an interesting question. I think the question we need to be asking is like, we assume stablecoins are going to take off on Bitcoin, be a huge amount of economic activity, then what does Bitcoin look like then? I've seen almost no discussion about this. So yeah, I don't really have answers or a strong position. Definitely have that as an open question. And maybe, I'd like to see us like encouraging more discussion around that.
Mhm. Do you know much about the specifics of how bridges between Bitcoin and other chains that host stablecoins work? Because like I've talked to Shazan from Lava about this a lot, and he's always like, oh, he's always takes the view of like stablecoins are important to the service he's developing, and he believes they're important to the ecosystem, but he kind of says it doesn't really matter where they run. So just like abstract that away and kind of who cares. And so, you could bridge between borrowing and lending from, Bitcoin as the asset, and USDC could be running on Solana or Ethereum, or who cares really where. And I wonder, like, do you feel like you have a pretty good understanding of how that bridging works, and is that pretty important how that works, or is it kind of just a transitional technology that may sort of fade away over time?
When you say bridging, I mean, I think of like wrap Bitcoin
Oh, I
or
think this is
Ethereum's
different.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, this
But then you
isn't.
brought up lava, which is an opportunity to avoid that. But with lava, they're using a stable coin built on top of Solana, but they're in theory they're not dependent on another chain. But is your question, how does it work on lava, or how do bridges work?
Yeah, so I shouldn't use the word bridges because it has a specific meaning. I mean, there's some way that Bitcoin is not directly connected to Solana, and I think there's some sort of, pre-image that's shared across chains or stored that helps ensure which transactions happened without actually connecting the chains in any meaningful way. And I think that was what Lava used. So I'm just saying, like, is there something in the Lava approach or other approaches like that that are going to help keep stablecoins off of Bitcoin? Maybe that's like a feature is you don't want stablecoins on Bitcoin, possibly. I'm not saying you do or don't. I'm saying, like, if one were to not want them but still be open to the idea that stablecoins are useful in many cases, would it make sense to um, find these ways to lightly couple the chains without any kind of actual bridging or fully coupling?
Potentially. Like, I think that people are going to pursue stablecoins on Bitcoin as they're doing right now,
Hmm.
regardless. And it seems like why would they gain traction? Well, if they're cheaper fees, if it's uh, I mean, to me, like stablecoin, like security is less. The security argument and decentralization argument of Bitcoin doesn't matter as much when you're talking about stablecoins.
Right.
Um, as just proven out on the fact that Tron is super popular, Solana is super popular for stablecoins, and it works. So I think it's about speed, transaction volume, and low fees. So if any solution on Bitcoin, including taproot assets, can deliver on that and beat Solana, Tron, etc., then like it or not, risk or not, I think that's gonna grow. I guess that's one point. You know, so even if even if Lava, loan protocol, things like that are successful, I don't see why that would stop that growth. Um, and then as far as like an invest, like the risk to Bitcoin, um, I don't see much to stop that. So I think you just have to evaluate that, and maybe everyone needs to sell if there's too big a risk. So,
Right. There's this
I
thing,
mean,
and maybe
I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Like,
I
how
guess
do you see Lava fixing this problem?
I don't see Lava directly fixing it. I think if there's anything that Lava can do to help encourage a solution, is kind of to, you know, maybe abstract away the specifics of how stablecoins work. Like, I think maybe I don't want to speak for Shazan, but I kind of feel like everybody who's not in Bitcoin or crypto or any of that, and they hear, maybe they're in like, outside the US system, and they hear the ability to hold USD whether it's USD-like thing or whatever, they get excited about that because they may not have had access to it before, and they think of USD as much better than their local currency. So I think there's like, I think some sort of large scale proven demand for that. And I think I've had a hard time tracking down numbers. But if you can hold stable coins, USD, where you can hold USDC, but you can't hold USD, that's like an attractive value proposition to some set of people in the world. There's more people probably who don't have access to the US system than do. So that to me feels like an easy way to get a bunch of people excited and engaged in trying out these products. But ultimately, I don't think they understand all of the underlying risks that are present there. And I'm wondering if, if you do that and then you finally upgrade and figure out what Bitcoin's all about, and it's really about wealth savings and kind of wealth storage and value storage. It's not really, you know, it's not the same as a dollar. It's just this asset. Maybe we can have payments on it with Lightning and stuff. But my question is like, do we need to imagine there's always a future where this USDC either has to be on these other very centralized networks, or it has to be somehow on a Bitcoin centric taproot asset type thing? Or is there some new, have there been any new ideas like a set of servers that you pay, with Lightning to verify a transaction, but it doesn't claim to run like a network the way, Solana or Ethereum claim to run. It's just kind of like a bunch of, server infrastructure that anybody who wants can run, and they can verify these transactions. And that's sort of the type of network that the USDC of the future, or USDT, gets launched on. And then there's neither hopefully there's no other chain risk, and it's not really directly coupled to Bitcoin. It's kind of a vague notion. I don't have a specific proposal for what that should be, but I'm just wondering, like, is there exploration there? Are people excited about that core concept?
I don't know. I don't really get it, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know.
But is there such thing? I mean, I would guess that from what you've said, and I think what I know, that things like Tron and Solana and Ethereum are not tokens that you would want to own, right? We have agreement on that? Okay. And the
Wait, when
reason
you say
being,
you, do you mean me personally, or people who care about owning and transacting in US dollar stablecoins?
well, you as someone who kind of understands more of the details about how these systems work, not just somebody who's like, hey, I'd love to own USD somewhere, right? Some USDC, USDT, I don't care, right? I think once somebody gets a little bit more educated about it, I think they often come to the conclusion that like you don't really want to own these underlying assets that power these networks because they are ultimately fairly centralized, and they don't really serve necessarily a function that you can't serve without a bunch of servers.
I I agree. I don't think people should own Tron and Solana. Like, especially, I mean, so first of all, I think it's a bad investment. Secondly, if my use case is I want to transact in dollars or hold dollars, I just want to transact and hold dollars. I don't want to like have to worry about gas fees or holding some other coin to pay for gas fees.
Yeah, so that all sounds right to me. So then, is there not a new hypothesis or other ideas around how to solve, like, hold something dollar-like without having to hold these random tokens or have gas fees and other kind of those types of infrastructure costs that are kind of fairly unknowable and seem uncorrelated to the usage of the USD?
I don't know. I
Maybe it's too hypothetical to actually have
I
any
don't know. The
grounding in
main
reality.
topic I was interested in is like the what is the consensus risk to chains, Ethereum
Yeah,
and Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin, but learning from Ethereum as well by having stablecoins on the blockchain.
right.
That's the main thing. I don't.
Cool. And I think you mentioned too about the the Mevel point. Do you want to emphasize anything around that?
It's I mean, I listed that just as it's distinct from what we talked about, but related. Just in terms of being a centralizing force. But I think it's distinct enough. We can just skip that for now.
Okay. Um, okay. So I guess maybe we're getting into the really rapid fire section. Are we in the rapid fire section now? The
Let's
lightning
do it.
round, shall we call it?
Let's do it.
Um, there's this new, so we've got a ton of links. There's this new thing called, it's a blockchain-based pricing oracle, and it's called UTXOracle. And I've read a little bit about it, and it sounds like it lets me run something along with my node that can somehow understand what the US dollar price is of Bitcoin at any given moment, but I don't actually understand how it happens. And I understand that you have done some
I've done a
more
little bit
depth
of
in
it.
understanding this. So I'd like to hear kind of how does this work?
This one is not rapid fire because there's a few.
Okay.
I'll share a few details and then also have a bunch of questions. I'm definitely not an expert on it. I spent a little bit of time studying it, so I know enough to be dangerous. But let's start with like the overall problem trying to be solved. So we just talked about smart contracts. We just talked about stable coins being part of them. We've talked about lava in the past. So just to give a concrete example, if I have Bitcoin, I want to take out a US dollar loan, I enter a smart contract, such as with the Lava Loans protocol, and great, I can get US dollars. My Bitcoin's held as collateral. If I don't pay back the loan, some or all of that Bitcoin is given to the lender. Otherwise, if I do pay back the loan on time, then I get my Bitcoin back. Pretty cool. Well, for that to work, for that smart contract to work, it's all based on Bitcoin technology, Bitcoin transaction format, cryptography. There's one thing outside of Bitcoin it needs, though, which is an oracle for the price of Bitcoin. Because part of that loan protocol is that you need to liquidate the Bitcoin if the price of Bitcoin drops too much. So it needs to know the price of Bitcoin, it meaning the smart contract. Well, how do you know the
Yeah,
price of
meaning
Bitcoin?
how does Bitcoin map to US dollar when you say
Yeah,
price of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin knows nothing about the US
right,
dollar.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the price of Bitcoin denominated in US dollars. And so, yeah, that's not part of the Bitcoin protocol. So you need that knowledge from outside the Bitcoin system, which is why it's called an oracle problem. You need an oracle. So the most straightforward solution is, like Kraken or Coinbase or these different exchanges. Well, they have a price and they have a price feed, so just use that. But if you if you only use one company's price feed, that's subject to like hacking or abuse or malicious or just malicious activity or simply just errors and mistakes. And if you have like billions of dollars of activity that are based on smart contracts and you get bad input and it destroys all those contracts, or that's a very bad outcome. So the way Lava works or any of these smart contracts can work, well, you can use multiple oracles. So let's get the price feed from different companies and compare them. And I actually think that's pretty robust. But wouldn't it be amazing if you actually had like a price feed that wasn't dependent on any entity and was generally decentralized in how it's composed? And so with this project that a person created called UTXOracle, he actually analyzed the blockchain data, Bitcoin blockchain data in and of itself, and found patterns in it. And a pattern he identified that has existed for 10 or so years is that it's very common for users and via exchanges to do round dollar
Mm.
amounts of buys and sells and then hitting the chain. So like it was discovered that $100 worth of Bitcoin is a very common amount to be transacted on the Bitcoin blockchain, and $50 and $200 in different round amounts. Obviously, the Bitcoin US dollar price varies over time, so the amount of Bitcoin is not consistent. But once you identify these patterns, then you can estimate what the price of Bitcoin is if you believe in those strands. And in fact, I don't know if you have that link. We could show it to the audience if you want. Do you have that
Okay.
handy?
Yeah. I'll
I'll let
pull
you
it up.
dig it up, and I'll keep talking about it.
This is Steve
Um,
Simple, right?
yeah. So if you can reliably identify the $100 banned, and it's not gamed or changes over time, then you can obviously estimate the price of Bitcoin quite well. Yeah, so go
Is
ahead and
this
click. Yeah, click on the link there to go to the website, and then go scroll down. So first of all, we'll start with that graph. That just shows the performance of this Oracle historically. And,
Hmm.
at least eyeballing it there,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
that's pretty good, right? And
Uh-huh.
I think it's within 1% or something. And also it should be noted for the audience, it's not like there is no, even if we had perfection, we don't know the price of Bitcoin, because like, even if you look at Kraken or Coinbase, they all have varying prices because
Hmm.
there's no centralized authority on what's the price of Bitcoin. And it's not just exchanges too. Like if you and I, like if I go to your store and buy something, we're agreeing on a price. So there is no centralized price, but anyway, so it's historically been good. There actually, can you scroll up?
Oh,
There's just a, I think you have to click on scroll up, please. Click on the see the explanation videos. Click on the second one, and
is it
then
this one?
yeah,
Conceptual understanding?
and then you'll need to like skip forward a little bit. But there's a visualization of the blockchain data that shows the strands, which I think will help people understand it better. Um, so
Do you want to see something within this video?
yeah, are you in the yeah? If you
Yeah.
skip sort of preview, skip forward. There's a visualization of, it's kind of a colorful graph.
If it's right here near the beginning, like first minute or two.
I think so. So I think if you just slide along there, you should be able to see previews maybe. But um, in any case, so yeah, there you go. So this here is a visualization that helps you kind of, there's like strands there that stand out, which are like the $100 and different rounded dollar denominated amounts. So that's how it works. It should be noted though that like I think he's on version 8 of this algorithm, and
Hmm.
like ordinals broke it for a year or two, and then he
Mm.
came up with a new version. So that alone sort of points to the fragility to it. This is not like a perfect science where you come up with a formula that's provably
Right.
correct and then never has to change. That this has gone through many iterations. So I think this project is both that in theory super interesting and valuable, and I
Yeah.
think it's awesome that he created this as an experiment. Um, I'm sort of the mindset now is like, is this a cool experiment, but kind of in reality a toy, versus like, could it evolve into something that's robust enough to be uh, really used in real contracts? And so talking with
How
some
did
engineer,
how
go
did
ahead.
the you mentioned that ordinals broke it. How did it break it? Was it because the transaction sizes and frequency of ordinals transactions was screwing
Yeah,
it up
like
somehow?
I think at the bottom right of that graph, some of the strands that are of lower amounts were ordinals, and that messed up his
Is that
algorithm.
these things?
I think so.
I see.
So,
This is
and
ultimately that we're looking at like statistical analysis, right? Statistical techniques used to try to triangulate or give probabilistic assessment of where various dollar thresholds might
here
be.
is, and again, I could be completely wrong, but here is my understanding of how it's currently working. He, by looking at past data, including blockchain data, but also pricing, US dollar pricing data, was able, or first of all, just looking at the blockchain data itself, you can see these patterns emerge. You don't need any outside data. But then you have to look at historical pricing data to know that, like, oh, the most popular strand is $100 round amounts. Because otherwise, how would you know that without outside data?
Yeah.
So it's not like this model is perfectly only looking at blockchain data. It had to infer that.
Right.
He then created like a sketch of the distribution of these different strands, where like $100 was the most popular, and then the popularity of others, and then takes that sketch and applies it over future blockchain data, to sort of tease out what's the, to find the most popular strand, and then assume it's $100. So already I know some engineers have some concrete improvements that I think are like clear wins and improvements over the current model. Okay, great. So there's some known improvements that we can make. It also seems to me like applying data science and even machine learning to this could make it even more robust. Although one
Hmm.
concern in machine learning that was pointed out is that might be less not desirable if it's not a deterministic output. But it's still unclear whether you can come up with a robust design that can't be gamed. Or I actually, let me take that. I think you can't come up with a design that cannot be gamed. Some other ideas I saw from an engineer is some ideas on how you can measure possible gaming. And by gaming of this, so this is relying on data that of just transactions on the blockchain, and relying on the fact that a lot of exchanges are putting transactions on the blockchain
Right.
based on their customers that are these round amounts. Well, if I'm an adversary, like let's say I have a lot of hash power, I produce blocks, I could insert a bunch of transactions of my own that completely game this.
Right.
And if there's billions of dollars of smart contracts dependent on this, and
Hmm.
looking at every single block for what's the price of Bitcoin, and then someone mines a block with a bunch of nonsense that attacks this, you could destroy all those smart contracts. So obviously there's going to be adversaries trying to do that if there's money to be made. So being able to measure how much at risk you are of that gamifying, I think would be important. And I saw some good thinking and ideas of how to do that. So maybe that makes this more realistic. Meaning, if you acknowledge, like, yes, it can be gamed, we can't avoid that. But if we can measure what's the cost of, at least this has a cost to gaming. Like if it's just
Right.
a centralized feed from Coinbase or Kraken, it's costs nothing to game that. They just push a button and can game it, or
Yep.
meaning like they can create whatever price they want by pushing a button. Here you actually have to acquire block space on this global decentralized ledger. So you can put a price to it, and you can monitor it and like raise a red flag, like we're more of a risk of it being gamified. So I think that's good.
Hmm.
And then
And would you raise that risk within the UTXOracle
oh
software? Like, would you
yeah,
give
so
like a probability?
yeah, I paused because the other thought I had is, there's different applications of this. So the most extreme would be if you only rely on this UTXOracle, and you're looking at, and you're at the granularity of every block. That's the riskiest, because then as an attacker, I only need to modify one block to attack you. And if you're solely dependent on smart contracts on this one oracle, then the attacker can win. If you relax the requirements a little bit, and let's say you only care about the daily price, well, now you have like 144 blocks to look at. So it increases the cost of attack by 144x. So it's a much
Hmm.
more expensive attack if I had to like take over the 144 consecutive blocks, or a large majority of them. And if it's one of many oracles, you also reduce the risk of if this does get gamified. And so like, yeah, if there is some kind of like alert system saying like, hey, the risk of this oracle giving bad values is higher now, maybe you reduce how much weight it has in a multi-oracle solution. But it can also, if like the risk of gamifying is low, it could potentially be a safety valve if like a bunch of centralized price feeds are all colluding against the system. This could be the savior. This could be like, there could be like safety valves on smart contracts where if like we don't believe
Hmm.
the price, then exit to some pre-agreed upon exit, so that maybe it's not like the great. It's kind of like if we bet on like who wins the game, or we come up with some like elaborate bet on who wins the game, but it's not as clear cut as like X or like it results in a tie or something, and oh, we didn't think of that.
Right.
Then like maybe we each get our money back kind of thing. So you
Right.
could have these kind of safety valve situations, and maybe it can be part of that solution. So
Or if you can
that's
even rate the confidence level, like, high, medium, low, and if it's not high, then don't resolve the contract, and push the contract resolution time out from 144 blocks to 288 blocks, or some mechanism where you lengthen the time, but you still create like I guess a new form of consensus around how that scoring and rating and probabilistic distribution works.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine. So like, let's say you had three oracles, two from like Kraken and Coinbase, and one this UTX Oracle. If like if you have if UTX Oracle is not at high risk based on this monitoring, and then it strongly disagrees with the other two, then that could like raise a red flag, and you don't rely on any of them, frankly, maybe, or maybe you do rely on UTX Oracle's price and not the other two. Or yeah, if the trust in UTXO Oracle is low because the risk is high of gamifying, then you just discount it, don't use it as part of that consensus price.
So when I think about this problem, sort of I'm thinking about where does ground truth for that price exist? In reality, is it doesn't exist anywhere, but the best place where ground truth could be established is where there's highly liquid markets, like an order book with a lot of buy and bid ask, right? That's sort of how price gets determined today. And my understanding is there hasn't been much, if any, real progress toward decentralized order books, because I think effectively the reason we trust that Coinbase's price is real is because we trust they have a lot of bids and a lot of asks, and that's what's determining the price. What's the reported price today? And if you create a decentralized Oracle system, they would all probably every actor would probably just be inquiring with people who have like large order books. So it really collapses again down to just Coinbase, Kraken, a few large um, order books. So is there any? Do you know of any progress on if and how decentralized order books or trading could be arranged, or is that still kind of an open, unsolved problem?
I think the latter. I haven't heard of any progress the past few years. I don't track that, but I haven't seen any progress in that. Um, just one more thing on UTX Oracle. Another challenge is even if it were perfect, um, I believe that we don't yet know how to even incorporate it into a smart contract, because a smart contract is just a Bitcoin transaction, and there's no like Bitcoin script or opcode that allows you to introspect the blockchain data. So like if I create a Bitcoin transaction and write up the script for it on how these coins can be spent, I can't go write in that program like, oh, go look at all the blockchain data and calculate using this formula or whatever what the estimated Bitcoin price is in US dollars. So I've heard some people think or consider maybe you can use like zero knowledge contingent proofs to do that or something. I don't know. That needs to be studied. Maybe there's a solution, but if there's not a solution to that without like a consensus change to Bitcoin, then you get back to relying on an entity because you need an entity who's running UTX Oracle to estimate this price, and then it feeds it in. Well, then you're back to trusting that entity. So this all might just be like completely theoretical as well. But at the very least, I do find it like a super intriguing, interesting project. Maybe there's some legs here to add value to real systems.
Yeah, I always just like this pattern when somebody takes sort of a well-known system and applies like new statistical analysis to like reveal some truth that lives there that really we don't yet talk about living there. That's kind of a cool feature of what he's done. Um, so now that we've spent another 20 minutes on that, should we really get into the real lightning, or are we
Now let's do
gonna
lightning. Yeah, lightning
okay.
rounds.
So possible mini follow-up to our custody survey. I think, Steve, you had an anecdote from a friend who was impacted negatively. I don't know, I want to maybe remove value judgment, but who watched this show, heard us talk about all the different trade-offs and challenges of the custody, and ended up, I think, going to an ETF instead of what what he was otherwise considering or what he was otherwise doing. Maybe you can share a bit about that color.
Sure. Actually, I'll give there's two anecdotes that I've heard, which I think are um, interesting. So one person I know already held Bitcoin for a number of years, held it at Coinbase, and this person actually, I think maybe took half of it, sold it, and then bought an ETF. And their perspective was, and so took the tax hit, for example. But their rationale was that there's less risk of like phishing attacks, and with an ETF versus storing it. Even though in both situations the Bitcoin's literally stored at Coinbase, but if it's your own account, you can be phished, it can be hacked, and you can have the
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin stolen from you. With an ETF, if someone breaks into your Charles Schwab account or whatever, or Fidelity account, they're not going to like steal the Bitcoin in the blockchain from you. So that was that person's rationale, and I think in isolation that's a valid point. I think we even mentioned on our show that like that would be an advantage of an ETF. The other, and then another person actually watched our episode where we talked about different custody solutions, self-custody, custodial, and I thought our main takeaway was custody diversification.
Yeah.
Like, it's not the end of the world. We're not going to yell and scream at someone who uses a third-party custodian, but probably the number one golden rule I think we came to a consensus to was like custody diversification. So maybe that means half in an ETF, half in self-custody. Maybe it means half at Coinbase, half at River. Maybe it means half in BitKey and half in a Trezor. But ideally, two solutions that have pretty different risk profiles. But this person watched our show, and their takeaway was put all of it in an ETF. So not the exact takeaway that we had hoped, but that was that person's takeaway. And it's around this person just is like doesn't have the time or energy or patience to like do the 100 hours of study for self custody, so that they're quite worried about making a mistake themselves, which is
Mm-hmm.
completely understandable.
Yeah.
And they also they are not at a point in their Bitcoin journey or in their personal life situation where they feel much of a threat of um, whatever custodian they choose of failing them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a little misplaced trust, but that's where they're at. And I actually think a lot of people, especially Americans or people who have had a banking and legal and country system that has worked well for them, I think that's going to be people's default position, most people's default position. So I don't think it's like a crazy position at all. And so I think they are optimizing for simplicity, what they perceive as peace of mind, and then low fees as well. Like I ran Anchor Watch by them as a solution, because there you get like some benefits of self
Yep.
custody, but you get like insurance coverage and like peace of mind of that. But they definitely didn't like the fees associated with Anchor Watch. That
Mm-hmm.
that they're just like, I just want it to be like Charles Schwab, the mutual
Right.
funds I have at Charles Schwab. And I'm like,
Right.
well, talk about Bitcoin, but that's their mentality.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a lot of people's mentality. So that's the main thing. I just wanted to share a follow up on that. But I think so. My takeaway from that conversation, and just more holistically, and we chatted about it a little bit, like how does so ETFs in and of themselves are not like a problem, but if everyone opts into ETFs or too many people opt into ETFs and all the Bitcoin's held in ETF, there's a great centralization risk. And secondly, none of those people are in a position to use Bitcoin.
Right.
Use it. There's a million different potential ways to use Bitcoin, including today. None of them are super popular yet. But to me, the biggest point I take home is like we need to create more
Yeah.
ways to use Bitcoin, and that
Yeah.
whether that's paying for coffee or using it in a lava loan to get dollars, or if it's because there's a risk of a soft fork and creating two coins and you want to be able to like weigh in on that or cash out on that. There's all kinds of different uses.
Yeah.
We need, or zaps on Noster. or maybe AI payments of the future, whatever it is, or getting back to the first topic we talked about in the show, you're an entity that wants to self custody because you don't want to rely on some other country's government legal system. The more uses we have for Bitcoin and turn them from theory to reality will dissuade people from wanting to put their Bitcoin in an ETF.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think uses are, usage of Bitcoin is going to be the thing that sells people on kind of Bitcoin instead of purely, the the sort of financial value or the asset value. That's like can attract people, but I think ultimately it has to be useful in kind of daily life or in kind of goods and services that people want, which are probably not the ones that already work really well in the world. I think we have a lot of bias toward the past being what the future will be like. And I think one of the most important things we could collectively do, maybe individually for kids, but collectively as a society, is to recognize that the pace of change is increasing so fast that the things that worked before are unlikely to work in the future. And that can be across so many domains. And so I think one of the big arguments for diversification that I would sort of add based on other stuff I've been discussing or thinking through with people is that you may live in the US, you may have a Schwab account, you may have like really great access to financial services and really great assets, and maybe you have a home and mortgages and you have all kinds of great access, and you're like, well, why do I need Bitcoin? And one of the answers, like, we're entering extreme volatility in the future world. And it's almost certainly like 10 years from now, not going to look anything like what it looked like. How does quantum computing affect security on the internet? How does, there's a ton of change happening right now in Washington, DC. And it's going to create new systems. It's going to break down old systems, love it or hate it. That's what's happening. And so I think you have to be ready for volatility in technology, volatility in financial services and systems, volatility in politics and government. And it's just going to be sort of like there's enough stuff changing that you should be sort of not just saying, well, it has worked well in the past. We should say, what will work well for me in the future? And don't necessarily assume that it's just going to be kind of the same.
I, I agree with all that. I think a small percentage of the population gets sold on that. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's
it's
more like
hard to internalize.
that's like a vitamin. So I think people who care about the future of Bitcoin, people working on Bitcoin, number one thing has got to be even if all you care about is number go up and it being digital gold, we actually need to increase the number of uses of Bitcoin so that people will want to keep it out of an ETF. They have access to their Bitcoin so they can use it, whatever that use is. Will strengthen Bitcoin because we get much better distribution and decentralization of custody.
Do you have a favorite, maybe a pet project or an idea or something you'd like to solicit the people build or contribute, or an area people explore for a new way to use Bitcoin that sort of nobody's really thinking about or hasn't been explored very well yet?
Well, one I'm exploring more now, and we are is around AI and payment. So I think we'll be talking about it on this show. I mean, Max really cares too, so we'll talk about it in future episodes. But it's something I'm definitely in like study mode and learning. Um, so I don't have like conviction on that yet, but I think that could be like a huge growth area.
Yeah. I mean, I'm generally excited about ways that we use Bitcoin, the digital scarcity feature of Bitcoin to kind of be the counterweight or balance within the infinite of the digital plenty, right? Like most of the internet is infinite information, infinite feeds, infinite algorithms, and we basically only monetize it with attention today. And I think Bitcoin can be kind of a rooting or a grounding for, in infinite attention spaces and infinite digital copies of things. You actually have scarcity of Bitcoin as a counterbalance property, lets you build very, very different types of products in those worlds.
So I'm going to suggest we increase the pace. I think we got like 10 things left in 20 minutes. So
Okay.
we got to do like 2 minutes per topic.
Okay. How about I will bring up a tweet. This is an idea that you're supposed to for ETFs, for Ethereum ETF, you have to know how to hold it right. You need to hold it right in order to hold it well. So I'm going to bring up this tweet. I think we talked about it. Found it difficult to articulate why I've been so comfortable holding ETH over the last couple of years, despite the underperforming price action. And this sums it up so well. As someone that is chronically on chain, blah blah blah.
I think if you scroll down, the tweet he quoted is more succinct. Yeah, give me
Okay,
a quick.
this is the Jeff Park tweet. So people complaining about losing money passively long ETH are fundamentally misunderstanding how money and network value accrual works. Because guess who didn't lose money? Everyone who participated in levered ETH staking, restaking, and farming airdrops and LPs. You'd be conservatively up a whopping 30% last year in dollar terms. That's the whole
So,
point of utility. So
so I can't tell if this tweet is a troll and a joke or real, but I think the other one is real. It's just I found it kind of funny, so I thought it would be funny to share it. But
yeah,
I mean, so the point is like, oh, so Ethereum, the price of Ethereum has not performed well against Bitcoin the past 2.5 to 3 years. Well, depending on time frame, even if you go back, I mean, the peak Ethereum price was June 2017. So we're going on almost 8 years since Ethereum was at its peak relative to Bitcoin. So it's been a long time, but in particular, the last 2.5 years, it's plummeted relative to Bitcoin. And so I think if you have large Ethereum bags or larger than Bitcoin or whatever, you might feel depressed. The point of this tweet is like, oh, you weren't doing it, you weren't holding it right, you weren't investing it right. You should stake it and then take the stake and get liquidity out of the stake and then go like gamble on DeFi. Right? I mean, you can exaggerate this as much as you want. Lever, layers of leverage.
mm-hmm.
And then you could maybe get close to the returns of Bitcoin. But I just thought it'd be interesting to bring this up because like Bitcoin is it's far simpler. You can just hold Bitcoin. You don't have to play all these games to try to compete to get a reasonable return. You just hold Bitcoin is a much simpler system. And I think
And
that
that's a
it just
feature.
highlights it's a feature. So like the notion that I hear a lot in like Silicon Valley and crypto circles, like Bitcoin's like boring or whatever. It's like, well, simplicity is not necessarily a bad thing. And in this case, like all these like gamifications and Goldberg machines on top of Ethereum is frankly kind of a joke, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think this appeals to the mind of somebody who's like, I've got to be doing something, I've got to be improving somehow, I've got to be actively contributing to this thing, which I think is generally a good sentiment in the world of wanting to build and create things for people and sort of make the world better through technology. But if you're talking money, it's better to just have a good money and stick with it. You shouldn't have to do a lot to make your money work. Needing to beat inflation is itself an unfortunate feature of the current world. Okay, next up in our lightning, I shared a link for this Bitcoin confirmation risk calculator. This was also from Jameson Lopp. He ran, I think he built this thing, the confirmation risk calculator. And right now it says the dominant pool is unknown. So he's assuming 20% of global hash rate. I'd shared a couple runs of this earlier. I thought this was interesting to sort of get your head around what kinds of reorganization risk, what kinds of centralization there is in mining. I think this was published in the last week, and it's been a topic we've been talking about a lot recently. I thought it'd be interesting to look at, so I looked at it a few times over the week, and I think Foundry was at 36% global hash rate, and then they were down at 33%, and it's big in difference of number of confirmations needed from I think about 30 when it was at 36% down to 21 when it was at 33%. So that was a pretty big difference in the number of confirmations required to get reorg risk below 1%. But you were pointing out, Steve, that it's all a mess anyway because I think Bitmain already controls more than 51%.
Well, let's take a step back too,
Okay.
because a lot of the audience might not even understand what we're talking about here. So it's sort of common wisdom within the space that you should wait 6 block confirmations before you consider a transaction settled on Bitcoin. And going back even more abstractly, like if I send Bitcoin to David, that transaction needs to get mined in a block. So if I simply just press a button to send it, that just means it's broadcast out of the network. Just doing that doesn't finalize my payment to David, because I can send an alternative transaction spending the same coins that competes with the one I sent to David and gave, and used his Bitcoin address as the output. I could send a competing one with my address as the output. And even if David's wallet sees that I sent the first one, if it's not been mined, then the second one I send could double spend it. And then if David just gave me his fancy bicycle and I take off with it, then he's not going to get his side of the deal. It's the classic double spending problem, which is exactly what Bitcoin was invented to fix. Well, but it doesn't fix it by just broadcasting a transaction. It fixes it by using Bitcoin mining and mining blocks. So if it gets mined into one block, the probability of it then being finalized is pretty high, because like reorganizing the blockchain, unwinding that is low probability, but not zero. Now, when you mine two blocks, the probability of it getting reorged drops exponentially, and three blocks even more so, and so on. But in theory, there is no finalization on Bitcoin, because you could have a reorg that literally goes back to the Genesis block in 2009 and redoes every transaction. But in practice, of course, that's like impractical. And then we come to this. So like the industry, like most exchanges, most merchants will wait 6 blocks, 6 confirmations before they consider it settled. Some will reduce that to 3 or even 1 block for like smaller amounts, or if they want to accept the risk in order to improve user experience. It kind of depends, but 6 has always been an accepted golden rule. Like you don't need more than 6. And so that's what makes this calculator interesting, is that it tests that common wisdom, or challenges that common wisdom. And it shows that with the mining pool centralization, which we've talked about in the show before, that to really reduce the reorganization risk, you need to wait a lot more than 6 confirmations. And or did you plug in different values yet, David? Like if you plug in like 36%.
So we'll go back to 36% with
And
6 confirmations. And right now the reorg risk was, with the 20%, was 1.43% when we calculate that. If you
yeah, look at
just
the
go from 20% up to 36% hash rate, still well below 50, but you've just increased your reorg risk to almost a third.
yeah, it's huge. And then like, what if you change confirmations to 12? What does that do to
Not really
so
enough,
not enough. So
right?
you can, and you have to go up to quite a few. And I think that the original tweets by Luke and Jameson, we're talking about how crazy number of confirmations you need with the centralization that we see on the network today. So I think this is good information for everyone to have. Now, is this cause for panic? I don't think so, because there's 2 ways to reorg. Or there's 2 like causes for reorging the blockchain. One is intentional and one's unintentional. Unintentional reorg would be like two miners find a block at the same time, or mining pools do, and then they get broadcast on the network at the same time. When I say same time, I mean within like 1 second of each other, maybe 2 seconds. But if the 2 different blocks are found at like within a second of each other, they'll both get propagated out on the network, and then different Bitcoin nodes will receive one of them first, right? And it might be split. And so then different miners and different nodes will start building on top of different blockchains. And at some point, one of those forks wins and one loses. So you get an orphan block. That's when, and that occurs like fairly regularly. I forget how often, but I mean, I think, like on a weekly or monthly basis, you'll see a 1 depth reorg. So
And
that's
just to be clear, you mentioned nodes, which are certainly important, but my guess is the miners are kind of some of the first ones to run into this and sort of have to make a call on it.
yeah, that is correct. So,
So
sorry,
how
I should have just said miner. I mean, in terms of like building on a block, it's just miners. Yeah.
So how do you know much of the mechanics of how the software works? How do they decide which, like if it looks like they kind of two happened at the same time, how do they kind of decide? Is it really these pools have just tremendous amount of influence there, or do they just have pooling software that decides that? Or
Um, well, I mean, I mean, one way to decide is like I mean, they're going to receive one of them first, and as soon as they receive it, they start building on
hmm
that block. I actually don't know what the algorithm is. Then if they receive, then they'll soon receive the next one that's at the same block height.
right.
I actually don't know the algorithm that's sort of default in Bitcoin Core to decide between the two. I also don't know how much variation there is. Like, do different pools modify that code and optimize it for certain policies? I do know that recently the developer that goes by B10C has detected when pools like have even orphaned themselves, um,
Hmm.
which is seems like
Meaning there were two blocks from the same pool that were broadcast roughly similar time.
well, no, like well, yes, like let's say that yeah. So you have two pools, A and B, and A mines a block at the same time as B, and then and then receives B's block and just starts building on B instead of building on its own,
hmm
which generally wouldn't make sense. So those are good open questions. So if someone's listening and knows, or I can just follow up with folks afterwards to know the answer to that better. Um, but in any case, uh, I generally don't. So I think this is interesting. People should understand it, this risk, but I don't think it's like a super grave risk because again, reorgs can be intentional or unintentional, and the unintentional ones that just sort of naturally occur, even if they're deep, like several blocks deep, transactions will likely just be replayed. Like if it's not malicious, then no one's going to try to like sneak in new transactions at double spend. It would need to be malicious for there to be double spending. So if there's no intentional, like, so the attacker could either be the pool that's reorging the blockchain, or it could be just a regular user. A regular user won't know if they're not colluding with a pool. They won't know when these reorgs occur, so they won't know when to try to double spend. And so the only real risk here is if a pool both pulls off a reorg and tries to double spend, and well, then that would be a malicious attack. That we absolutely need to be concerned about that, but I think it's like low risk in the immediate term that like Foundry or Bitmain are going to try to pull that off.
So do they try to take the you mentioned kind of around the replay. Do they try to take transactions that looked like they were committed in the orphan block and they effectively resubmit them to the mempool, or they kind of treat them as if they are
Yeah,
in a mempool at that
right. So
moment?
any transactions that were mined in a block and at least some nodes in the network, some miners considered it the tip of the chain, like the most proof of work. And if that gets if you're a pool that decides not to mine on top of that block, but to mine on another block, all the transactions in that block that you're not mining on top of just go back into the mempool, right? Because they're considered unconfirmed transactions. So you would want to include the ones that have the highest free rate. I mean, you obviously you want to maximize profits. You want to include all the ones with the highest free rate. So if they made it into other people's block, there likely are strong candidates to go into your next block as well. So the new block you build that's not on top of the block that you're orphaning or whatever likely has the same transactions.
I
So
see.
there's no malicious intent. It's highly unlikely, I think, that there's going to be any kind of double spending attacks.
Right. And I won't ask you this now, but at some point I want to learn more about the mempool versus the mempools, because my understanding is we talk about it like it's a thing that exists or like a central thing, but I think reality is it's actually much more lopped around and distributed to a bunch of
Well, the
different
simple
places.
answer is it's decentralized, right? I mean, if there's 80,000 nodes in the network, every one of those nodes has its own mempool. So there's no one mempool. Even if you just consider the miners, if there's like 20 pools, they each have their own mempool. There's no centralized. And again,
So
for
are they
people
just
who don't
creating
know
a
what a mempool
cache?
is, the mempool is simply just the globally broadcasted transactions that want to get mined. It's just a queue of them. And yeah, there's no centralized authority on what that queue looks like. Each Bitcoin node has their own. Each Bitcoin node receives these at varying points in time. Obviously, in general, things propagate within 1 to 2 seconds around the world, and like most nodes overlap substantially in their mempool. But it's never this like perfect copy where everyone has the same view of the network.
Cool. And then just for the final bit on this, I think you had mentioned around how Bitmain has 51% or more, and I think you meant across their pools. And is the idea there that because they already have so much influence, the specifics of these lower things shouldn't concern us, but we shouldn't be concerned about this on the day by day basis, but we should be concerned about this on the broader longer term.
Yes to the latter, but no, I mean, yes to both of those. But the point I was actually making here is separate in that even if no pool had more than 36%, if you use that calculator, it looks concerning. If you plug in 36% and you want low probability of reorg risk, you need to have a lot of confirmations if you use that calculator. I'm just saying that, like, I don't think exchanges need to red alarm switch from 6 confirmations to 200 because that's what the calculator says, not because of the replay. So, like, the point I just made about the replay, like, if it's not a malicious attack by a pool, then even if there's a reorg, the transactions will be replayed and there won't be double spending.
I see. So just the malicious versus non-malicious distinction is kind of the one to
Yeah,
focus on. Yeah,
yeah.
got it.
So if, I mean, any given individual actor, if you believe there's great risk of a Bitmain or Foundry doing a malicious replay or malicious attack where they double spend, then you should increase your number of confirmations dramatically. If you think that's a low risk in the short term, then you don't need to worry about it. But as overall Bitcoin ecosystem and as a Bitcoiner, I think that this is a weakness that we want to strengthen over time,
Yep,
make more robust.
great. We are totally failing at lightning
Well, let's keep
anything,
going. We can
but
get
we will
more.
keep rolling.
We can go
We
over a
got
few
more.
minutes. We
We
can
got
get
more.
3 or 4
All right.
more in.
All right. So next up is a quick one. I think it's Justin. Tesla officially discloses holding 11,509 Bitcoin for the first time in its 10K filing. This was February 10th. So it's just a few days ago. And my understanding is it's probably because of the FASB rule change that I think went into effect in December, that now these can be carried in a fairly beneficial way for the corporation. Is that kind of what we're seeing here?
Yeah, well, not much to say here other than I thought at first I'm like, oh no, they disclosed it in the past, but what they disclosed in the past was the U.S. dollar amount that they purchased and
Hmm.
sold in Bitcoin. This is
Right.
Tesla. They never disclosed the number of Bitcoin, so everyone had to sort of like estimate over some, you know, cost average of the Bitcoin over a window of time, maybe even 3 months. But
I see.
now there's like specific, precise data on the number of Bitcoin that Tesla holds. The other interesting thing is that they bought more. So, they originally bought like what, $1.5 billion or something. I mean, pretty substantial. I think it was like, I actually forget how much, but yeah, I mean, they had a lot of, I mean, it's like $1.5 billion. Then in June of 2022, they sold like 3/4 of it or some substantial amount, which is a bit, no one really knows ultimately why they did that, but notably they didn't sell all of it, right? They kept some, and now they've added to it. So I think it's a positive sign.
Hmm. Great. All right. We will keep an eye on that. Also, when talking public markets and holdings, I'll just mention there was this news. I don't know if we have this tweet teed up, but there's this news that GameStop, the kind of original and probably largest meme stock ever, is, I think the guy was hanging out with Saylor and is presumably convinced or considering adding Bitcoin to its balance sheet. So they may be another micro mini. or mini strategy. Um, okay, next tweet we're going to share is this one from BTC Sessions, which actually, I think whenever somebody takes a piece of information and thinks about it in a new way or shares it in kind of a distilled new way, it's interesting. So he had a new framing around how to think about fiat, crypto, and Bitcoin. Number one, fiat is elites can print money. Number two, crypto is everyone can print money. And three, Bitcoin is no one can print money. So oftentimes these are confused where people say, you know, crypto and Bitcoin are kind of the same thing. A bunch of people, making Ponzi's, and the framing of who gets to print money is an important one. And the old system in fiat is, the elites and the government gets to print it. And in crypto, you can have anybody who wants can print a meme coin. The president can have one. Everybody who launches a new startup can have a meme coin. And Bitcoin, nobody can. Satoshi didn't even print it. He had to use energy with the algorithm to buy it. So that is the next one. Do you have any
Okay.
favorite? Oh, we should talk
Quick,
Obscura.
Obscura. Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
wrap up with that one.
Okay. So we'll,
It's
yeah,
not really rapid fire, but we'll kind of rapid fire it. It's better to mention it than not. But
yeah. And I'm actually going
yeah,
to pull up the screen, the landing page, because I thought it's just so beautiful and so kind of just well designed. It doesn't look like every other random AI or crypto startup. I actually really love the aesthetic of this kind of that 8-bit thing.
yeah. And this is a new company and VPN service that was just launched by a friend and colleague, Carl Dong. He's a former Bitcoin Core developer. I've known him for a number of years, and so just a really solid Bitcoin developer. But he decided a few years ago to start a new company on his own. It's a VPN, so he really cares about privacy and improving people's privacy. And what's distinct about his approach to a VPN is that the Obscura it's kind of like can't do evil versus do no evil approach for VPN. Other VPNs have to have a stance of do no evil. Because other VPNs know who you are as a customer, at minimum, like your IP address, if not other information about you, and they know the traffic that you're sending. They know both pieces of information, so you're trusting them to do no evil. With Obscura, it can't be evil because they don't have the information about what you're looking at on the internet. They do have your IP address, and if you another interesting thing is related. I mean, people might be wondering how is this Bitcoin related? Well, they accept Bitcoin, which I think is super interesting, and I think it's a really. We talked earlier about it's important to use Bitcoin. This is a great use case for Bitcoin because with
Yeah.
a VPN, the customer base is naturally inclined to care about their privacy. So you are going to be naturally inclined to not want to spend like with a credit card, which has your identity, or any other form of payment that has your identity. So you can use Bitcoin and Lightning to pay for it. But Obscura then knows your IP address. However, they don't know the traffic that you're browsing because of their technical solution, which they've partnered up with Mulvad to have like a two-hop solution where Obscura knows your identity at least through IP address, doesn't know the traffic, and Mulvad is the exit out on the internet. Mulvad knows your traffic, but not your identity. And by separating those two and keeping them independent, it enhances your privacy.
It's great. I loved when I met Carl. I feel like he's a very principled builder and thinker in the space. So I'm cheering for him to be successful with this. And I would just again raise the flag that if somebody is thinking about building on Bitcoin or they want advice on how to do it or where to look for resources from the design community to how to think about building products, launching products, etc. There's a lot of people around, Steve, your network, my network, and others, where we can probably help people get plugged into stuff. So if you're thinking about something new, like let us know, and we want to try to be helpful and get you all connected. So be like Carl.
That's a good way to wrap things up. Be like Carl.
All right. Thanks. We'll catch you next week.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.